So I'm Nick, and I like to think of myself as a storyteller, which I'm sure a lot of people in the room do. So when I talk about real-time VR storytelling, what do I mean? It's basically using game engines, those ones you see there, to tell a story with pretty much no interactions. You're just sitting there, the story happens around you. So we have alternatives to this, of course. We could film stuff on cameras like we have here or other places. People have talked about that today. It's a really good option because you can, you're ready to go right now. You've got cameras that work, you can shoot stuff. You can go all the way through to Gear VR. You've got a store you can sell them on very, very soon. It works right now. You can have stereo or not. Either are great options. The benefits and negatives of filmmaking, obviously, those, you know, if you're going to shoot anything on film, there is a production involved, there is time, there is equipment, all those things. Those are pretty much the same. One thing you don't have is positional tracking, pretty much. You can't move your head around and get perspective on the world when you're doing that. That sometimes gives people sickness. It doesn't have to be a problem, sometimes can be. And the final thing is it's linear. If you've got a 2-minute video, you've pretty much got a 2-minute video. You sit there and watch it. Which is fine. There's not a problem with that, but I'll move on to why it's a thing. We've got pre-rendered, so you could render something in 3D. Someone else talked about that a little earlier. The guys at Presence have got some over there, which is marvelous. And it's got all the, again, all the benefits and negatives of pre-rendered and CGI. You have to sit there and wait for it to render, but if you've got the resources for that, it can be great. Again, you can have positional, actually. The guys at Presence are showing some of that off today. It's a little bit early, but it's still very, very good and shows really good benefits. Again, mostly this is linear. So both of these are great options, but with trade-offs and benefits and all that kind of thing. So what are the benefits of real-time? Well, you've got the positional tracking, and that's great. You can look around the world, you can look over things, you can look under things, that's great. You've got a virtual camera, so you don't have to worry about the camera stitching. When you're filming, as we heard earlier, you just have to stitch all the video together. There's questions over whether you have 180, 360, all that kind of stuff. Tricky things, like things being really close up. Less of a problem, simplified. Close-ups, I don't know what I meant. Positional, you can stick the camera wherever you want. You can have it up in the air, you can have it before. It's as simple as moving a camera around, very nice. Crew and equipment you don't have to worry about, it's all simplified. Now, the scope and the scale of content, you can kind of make whatever you want. This sort of applies to 3D rendered and stuff. You can kind of do whatever you want without limit, as far as you can imagine. And there are stylistic options beyond realistic. So if you're doing something filmed, you're kind of stuck with what you're shooting in real life. You can kind of do whatever you want with real time. But the big thing that's really relevant to real time is that we know what the viewer's doing. If the viewer's looking over here, if they're ignoring something that's over here, we know what they're doing. We can control their world and their experience and their story, which is really good. So where do I come from? To tell you kind of where I come from, I'm a storyteller. I like to think of myself that way. So for 10 years, I was doing animation and post-production in film and TV and marketing stuff. I decided I wanted to be a director and writer and stuff. In the end, I managed to write a script. I got some funding for it, and I made this film called Proto, which is about 15 minutes long. It's about the CGI robot who walks around and stuff. Again, CGI is quite complicated and difficult. It was quite a challenging thing to do, to have a protagonist that did that 15 minutes. It took 2 years to do, in fact, near 40 people. We had some pretty good success. We went to some festivals, did pretty well. I think anyone making a short film would be pretty happy with that result. The thing is, there's limited ways for me to tell stories this way, because I spent 2 years on it. How many times can I get 50 grand? How many times can I get 40 people or so willing to help me out to do that? Sometimes you can get favors, sometimes you can't. I don't have another 50K to make another short film. I could do it without any money, but you know, there's then limits on that. Now, when VR came along, I saw it and I thought, well, that looks really good. I could maybe do something with that. And in the end, I thought, well, what if I could do storytelling? So I made 2 experiences based on Studio Ghibli films, Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro. These had 0 funding and turned around Spirited Away in about 4 or 5 weeks, My Neighbor Totoro in about 8 weeks. Just me on Spirited Away. I had an animator help out on My Neighbor Totoro. It's a bigger opportunity, I kind of feel, at the moment. Film and TV is kind of oversubscribed. I think if anyone's tried to make a film and get it out there, there's so many. Why do people have to watch yours? It's very difficult. There's less VR content out there, especially storytelling stuff. There's greater possibilities. I can tell different types of stories that I can't tell with a camera finding a set. I can make my own sets, it's fine. Storytelling to me is important. I'm sure it is to a lot of people. I can tell more stories doing this. So Spirited Away. Now, the reason I chose this one first, I love Studio Ghibli films. This was the first one I saw. It felt like a natural thing, but also realistic stuff. Doing it in VR is challenging because you've got the GPU, the graphics, the hardware. Doing stuff with reflections, making it look real is quite challenging. So I thought, well, it should be something that's stylized. I thought 2D, a cartoon, taking that to 3D. Not only could this be stylized, but it could also run really well because you don't have to worry about lighting. You can paint all the light in. You don't have to worry about certain things, so it's very good for performance. Also, art design is really important. I didn't want to spend half a year designing a room or designing experience. I thought I'd take something that someone else had already done the work for. And they did, and it's marvelous. And again, this 2D cartoon style, looking at it in VR is quite striking because you wouldn't expect to see this thing in 3D, let alone be there within it, so that's important. The location for the scene is interesting in every direction. It's animated in various places, which is great because there's things to look at. There's characters. There's 2 characters in this one. And that's awesome in VR to I think someone's mentioned this before. Having a character that you can look at, see things happening and react to is great. And this has great storytelling. That's really important. However, VR storytelling is not film. This is a film. It's told with cuts and close-ups and all these sort of things. The layout of the scene is in such a way that you can move to another position and see it from a different angle. In VR, it's difficult because you can't really cut. If you cut, you sort of teleport. That can work. That can be fine, but it's not necessarily what you want to do. It's difficult. And if you cut around at the same pace of the film, you're flipping around the scene. It's crazy. You don't want to do that. So telling this particular story is difficult. And if you move around, move the camera around, movement can cause sickness. It's difficult. So for fans of the film, this was great. They could enter this scene. They knew the nostalgia, the wonder of seeing it was great. But for this particular scene, it was not ideal. Now, My Neighbor Totoro, bus stop scene. Characters, again, they're awesome. We got characters. They're big. You stand near them. You see them. They're awesome. And people who know the film love it. They stand next to these characters they love. They run around. They do everything they did in the film. And I added a bit of interaction to this one. I thought I'd experiment with it. You take the umbrella off the bus stop stand, if anyone's seen the film, they know, and you can hand it to Totoro, and he picks it up, and he goes, oh, that's wonderful, and it rains on him and stuff. It's great. But again, this story is best told in the film. And the other thing I discovered was, this isn't the best VR experience. There are other games that are much better, and other ways of experiencing VR that are much better. So this isn't the best thing for the film. And it's not the best VR experience, and what's the deal? The issue is down to the language. The language of VR storytelling is the most important thing. Taking a film and just copying it and sticking you in VR, and it's not going to work. You have to do it kind of for VR. So the language of VR storytelling. What can we learn from film? Well, camera angles, the editing and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't translate directly. Some stuff we can do. We can cut, we can fade, some things like that, but they do not translate in the same way. A fade indicates, you know, a passage of time. Shorter fade, like it's a blink, well, that's different again. But things we can take from it, scene composition, the way a scene is around you, the way it directs your eye, the way it kind of tells that story is still important. That's an important bit of storytelling we can do. Wide shots. Now, this film is Old Boy. There's an extended long scene, all shot from a single angle, where it's a fight scene. The camera moves up and down the corridor, but essentially it's a single shot, the entire scene. No cutting. It's amazing. And it shows that you don't have to have editing. Birdman, the entire film from one unedited take, you know, give or take. It's pretty much just one long take. And there are other scenes in other films like Children of Men, shows that editing doesn't have to be used to tell a story. Fades work, again, you can fade between scenes and they indicate a passage of time or can move you around, that can work. Theatre, you know, there's no editing again, no camera moves. The person's in one space, they get a theatre space in front of them and they watch play unfold. And you can have interesting things. Look, you've got stage production, you've got an amazing stage over there, which is fabulous. But, you know, we can do more than theatre. We've got a whole space to work with around us. We can have fabulous worlds around us that are not necessarily just the stage. You can have a whole world. And games. Games have been trying to find these sort of problems for years, really. So to pick up Bioshock Infinite over here, this is you watch a couple essentially getting lynched by a racist mob on a stage. It's very entertaining, not for the ways you might imagine, and that might come around. But essentially you watch it and it unfolds in front of you. You can see the reactions of the crowd around you, and you are not partaking in that scene. You do not have to move. And Half-Life 2, again, you see characters interacting inside a scene and all that kind of stuff. But usually in games, they're kind of geared a bit towards aiding the gameplay or furthering the game's story. And essentially, you can move around in most of these scenes as well. So all these mediums are great, and there's certain things we can take from all of them, but they don't solve any of our problems. VR is a new medium, we need new ideas. We should give viewers the time to kind of acclimatise to the space, a minute or so or two, just to get used to something before things happen. That's a good idea, because you don't want to rush things into people's faces, otherwise they're going to get a bit confused before anything can happen. We can use the space, we can use it vertically, stuff going all the way up into the air, stuff going around us, layering into the distance. These are things games which are normally 2D don't necessarily think about. We can drag the viewer's attention. So if stuff is happening over here that we want them to watch, we can animate something flickering across the screen, drag them over there. Audio cues work as well. And if they refuse, if people do not want to look in the direction when you're trying to drag them over there, you can, if we're in real time, we can have stuff happen here instead. If they're looking over there, we can put the things there instead. It's a way to customize the viewing experience. But one thing is, how do we pace it if we no longer have cuts? We can't just have stuff happen one after the other, because again, you're going to get this problem where stuff will sort of happen over here. How do you queue it up? So the VR, the Oculus Story Studio, this is something they've talked about a lot recently, and I actually went out to them last year and sort of chatted with them about it a bit. I'm not bragging, I'm just saying. And the idea is they're using these things called gaze cues. And again, we talked about this earlier in the day. And the idea is not just, well, it is essentially, if something's going to happen over here, you wait for people to look over here, and then the thing can happen. And then you can pace out the scene. And you can do it more than that. You don't necessarily just have to wait for someone to look in a particular direction. You can take into account everything the person is looking at. You can have very interesting ways of figuring out the sort of where they're paying attention to. And you can combine that with audio cues, with visual cues. And again, I sort of mentioned it too early, but you can transport stuff. Instead of having your character over here, you can make them walk in front of the player, the viewer, to do this. And eventually the idea is to subconsciously give the viewer the idea that they're not controlling it, but they've got control over it, so that it's all just a way of framing the storytelling. We don't have to be stuck with forced, with awkwardness of where they're going to look and everything like that. We can customize it around what they're doing. So again, VR experiences are best when they're made for VR, the presence in the place and everything like that. We can use depth and layering and animation, all these sort of things, to focus viewers where we want them to look. We can control the experience of story in a way that's really not possible with other mediums, and also not really possible with other types of VR storytelling. Telling the story is what's important, and we can tell it in new ways, and we should embrace that. So opportunities, if you're looking to get into VR storytelling, real-time. Filmmakers, so if you've done a lot of filmmaking, not necessarily experienced with game making and stuff, a new medium rarely comes along with genuinely new experiences, and there's power in that. I think I found it myself, where there's power in that in telling your stories and having people kind of pay attention to it. There are tools that aid it. This is Unity's Director. It's not quite out yet, but it's coming along. So in Unity, you will be able to have a timeline to queue up your sequences. That'll help with some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. That Source is Filmmaker. Source Filmmaker, not directly for VR, but again, there are tools out there to help. Limited coding. You don't have to know loads and loads of coding to get an experience up and going. It's very, very easy to use Unity or Unreal Engine 4 to start going. I've only been doing games and any kind of games technology for about a year, and I've done fine. Skill sets built now will shine later. So in a year's time, when everyone's doing it, you will already know what you're talking about. Like I pretend to. Interactive crossovers. So if you wanted to do games and things like that, this is a really good way to kind of maybe make a crossover between the two. Skill sets are applicable across the board. Animation studios. So if you're an animation studio, like Studio Ghibli or Aardman, Studio Ghibli went and made a game called, in collaboration with a game studio, called Ni no Kuni. It's amazing. This is a still from the game using in-game graphics. That is not a cartoon. And this is from a Wallace and Gromit game. Again, looks very, very, very much like the cartoon. existing experience and skill sets are very important for design and storytelling and style. These are all universal. Character animation, it's vital if you're going to have characters, obviously, and it can be very, very powerful in VR storytelling. Production pipelines can be adapted, that's fine. Previous experience with interactive games, a lot of animation studios and people who've got those cross-media stuff have that interactive experience. And of course, you can also collaborate with existing games technologists to get those skills. And finally, financial opportunities. So consumer stuff, we can sell stuff directly to consumers on stores. Oculus Store, when it comes up, we will be able to sell stuff directly. Gear VR, very close to being able to sell it. Commercial experiences, we've got How to Train Your Dragon 2 and Interstellar experiences to advertise the film. Companies had to make these. There are opportunities to make and sell services to companies. Short experiences and episodic stuff. Short stuff's really great in VR anyway. So to sell like a 5-minute, 10-minute story and have an episodic sort of thing is really good, and that's definitely a viable option. And again, the sort of media events, corporate events, really great. Film and TV is saturated and competitive. Lots of people want to get into it. There's a limited bandwidth for opportunities to get out on that. Internet distribution, if you made a film, stuck it on the internet, who's to say anyone's going to pay for it? Or and you're competing with some of the fabulous YouTube streamers who are in the audience for eye time and concentration. So it's a really difficult thing if you're going to go traditional routes for storytelling. This is a new route that potentially has a lot of bandwidth and growth and stuff. VR is open, growing, and very, very hungry. So yes, that was my entire talk. I hope you enjoyed it. That's me. I'll be over there by Crystal Rift if you want to chat. Otherwise, questions.
Thanks so much for that. Really great stuff yet again. Yeah, so let's try it again. Anyone got any questions? Oh, go on. Oh, yeah, at the back, wearing the tie.
So I'll take it you're done with Miyazaki stuff in general?
Yeah, I made a couple of them, and then which is great, and I really enjoyed it. I was planning on doing more. The thing is, someone else owns all the rights to that, and I think at some point we tried to actually get in contact and say, hey, would it be possible to show it in public? And never heard anything back. So it's difficult, and as well, if you're going to spend time making something, it's difficult to, if it's someone else's rights and stuff, to spend time on something you don't necessarily own the rights to. So currently working on a bunch of original stuff now, nothing I was ready to actually show, but stuff I will actually be able to do what I want with. I would love to do more, so if Studio Ghibli are in the audience, you know where to find me.
Brilliant, and yeah, chap with the hand up right there, great.
Hi, you mentioned the gaze cues. When it comes to live action, is that a possibility at all with like looped video, or do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine a situation where you have cues in a video scene and you're looking over in one place, and the problem, of course, is how do you then cut to that bit of video? You could maybe split the scene up into a bunch of different videos, and then one gets sort of patched over the top somehow, but again, is that fading across, is that cutting across? Do you cut the entire video? It's quite difficult. You could fade and bring up. I mean, it's quite, I imagine the difficulties of doing that probably make film storytelling best if it is a linear experience. But that's not to say you can't, it's just, I don't see why it makes particular sense.
Also, do you reckon, I imagine there's quite a lot of directors who would be upset about the pace changing. Do you reckon that's a problem at all?
I mean, if they've designed their story to not have pace changing, then yeah, that's a problem. But I get, if you're going to do real time, if you're going to go in this direction, the idea is it's a good thing to be able to essentially tell the story. That's what you want to do. And so it's crafting this real time experience in such a way that it tells the story. Directors as well, when they're telling it on film or TV, a lot of it's around crafting cuts, around crafting, directing, all those subconscious things that come across through an edit. That's not possible in VR. We can't do that. So pacing it is not a way of destroying the director's work. It's a way of preserving as much of that story as possible, I guess, or crafting it that way.
Cool, thanks.
And better make it the last question. We got one more. Oh, we've got 2 hands up. The guy nearest to the microphone, I'm afraid you win. So yeah, fire away.
Yeah, in terms of like bringing attention to to the user, so if they need to look over there or something during gameplay. Do you ever experiment with typical kind of ways that games do it? Like, for example, you have games like Call of Duty that might use like arrows and a big label, Assassin's Creed that have labels in the corner. Or do you look at subtle cues like in The Last of Us, if there's an enemy nearby who might see you, you've just got like a little glow on the side and the music kind of gets a bit lower. Just have you ever experimented with these typical kind of way the games do it and have any success with that?
I sort of see what you mean. I think you could easily have flashing arrows, like literally going, look over there. But the problem is you're breaking immersion then, if you're doing it unsubtly.
Yeah.
You're kind of, and it's kind of like you want it. I mean, I guess the whole hope is that a person can be watching a scene happen in front of them, and you don't have to make them conscious that they're being directed. Right. And that's, I guess, what the gaze cues are about. It's so if someone doesn't have to be directed, we can literally see where they're looking and kind of tailor the story in a way around ensuring that they catch all that story. I think if you were to have kind of I'm not sure of the technical term, but something that's quite obvious that's happening on the screen to direct you. And you can also, of course, thread it into the story. You can have a character go, oh, look over there, or you can have sound smashing and you look over and something's falling over. You can have those things, which feel a bit more natural. And I think it's probably the job of the storyteller to ensure it is completely natural and that it's effective in doing that.
Okay. Nice one, brilliant. Well, we better call that it, but thanks so much, Nick.
Thank you.